Mike, thanks so much for being here and agreeing to be interviewed for the IACC.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Curious to know, how did you become a career coach?
Yeah, so it all started when I separated from the military back in 2014. I had a lot of family friends helping me with my resume, and I actually landed working with the Wounded Warrior Project and one of their career coaches who helped me land what I really considered to be my first job out of the military. And I had a couple others before, but this is my first kind of long-term gig. And, I always wanted to find that way to give back. So I just slowly started helping, a vet here, a vet there, through the company's ERG group. And, my wife kept pushing me like, hey, you should do this more and more and more. And so as I slowly began to grow, helping more and more vets, I had the opportunity through a previous employer to get my career coaching certificate. And so I jumped at the opportunity. And then later that year, with a couple other veterans, we launched our nonprofit, Vet Overwatch, which is dedicated to providing free career coaching services to recently separated veterans and then active military. And it's just been a passion of mine to give back and continue to help other veterans find their way out of the military.
That is awesome. And so do you typically work with people who are just right out of the military, or what about folks that have been out for a period of time?
Yeah, so typically those individuals who have been out for some time know the ropes. They know kind of how to get their, resume in the door, use their network, things like that. It's the individuals who are still active duty or active guard or reserves that are getting ready to leave that life, or those within 1 to 5 years of being out that are typically the ones that need a lot more help. They don't know how to do any of that. They've spent a lifetime, anywhere from 4 to 20 years or more, even up to 30 years, serving in the military, which is a completely, it's just such a different world than what we live in. And so they're the ones that need the most help. I say again, those who have been out 5 years or more, know the ropes. They've made connections. They have built that network up. It's the ones that are brand new out that need the help.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what would be a typical client for you? Would it be someone right within 5 years?
Yeah. Ideally, I would say that individual who's about 6 months out from getting out of the military. Being able to support them prior to them stepping out and reduce the stress of it's just one more thing they have to try and figure out on their own, would be my ideal client. It doesn't matter, again, if they've served 4 years or if they've served 30, if they're, at the lowest, levels, an E2 or an E3, or at the highest, an O10, a general, things like that. It doesn't matter, because the world is so different. Getting them before they actually step out that door and giving them that runway would be the ideal client.
What do you have any examples of clients that you are working with or have worked with?
I do. So the first one, his name is Devin, and he is not your even my typical client. So he was Air Force active duty. He was an RQ-4 Predator drone pilot, which up until just a few years ago was a strictly officer career field. And they opened it up to enlisted pilots a few years back as there was a shortage of pilots. And so Devin had been flying the Predator drones for a few years, but was looking for something more. He had been working on receiving his actual pilot's license, so he could fly regular aircraft. And he really wanted to make that jump to from enlisted to officer and actually fly a real live aircraft where he's in the cockpit and things like that. So he wanted to stay in the service, but he wanted to make this jump. So we actually set out 2 different paths for him as we were working together. And the first was he was trying to stay active duty and make that jump from enlisted to officer. Unfortunately, at the time, COVID was running rampant, and the Air Force had canceled all of the, we'll call them promotion boards, that he would have been considered in. So we had this second option that we were working, where he was looking at local Air National Guard or Air Reserve wings that had potential open flying units. So we started working on his networking. As a drone pilot, he had started connecting with officers, and building out this network of officer pilots really helped him. He had multiple interviews, everything from flying, an F-15 fighter jet to a C-130 air tanker. And eventually, he got his number called, and he is now a C-130 tanker for Air National Guard unit. So he did have to leave active duty. But the coaching that I also provided allowed him to not only get that guard position where he's working, part-time, but he was also able to use that same skill set to land a job at one of our big defense contractors. I'm not at liberty to discuss which one, but he's really happy with where he's at and where he was able to go. And now he's set for the next few years, at least, as a pilot flying the C-130s and working for a defense contractor.
Oh my goodness, that is so exciting. And you're right, it's a different path, because when you were talking about individuals who are leaving, they know they're going to leave. This is a story of someone that wanted to potentially stay in, and then did end up leaving and getting some pretty exciting opportunities. I'm also really interested in knowing if you've helped someone perhaps with a really challenging scenario, because I have actually looked at, in my field of in recruiting, looked at resumes that have been created by individuals that have just left the military. And I know it's English what I'm reading, but it's such a different language.
Yes, it really is. And I like to tell people I'm just a military translator. And it really is a whole separate language. Everything's abbreviated. And they do it off of performance reports, and they're given really strict guidelines as they're doing performance reports. Like, hey, you can only have exactly one line. So you abbreviate and you do slashes and you do all this stuff to make it fit. We're on the outside, we just don't do that. Right? We spell things out. Not everyone knows the abbreviations. And so I go and I help a lot of them kind of translate their resumes. So we have this individual. He was actually brought to me by a recruiter. With our recruiting backgrounds, we help a lot of people. So I started talking to this individual, and I asked him what was going on. Well, it turns out he had spent about 12 years in the Army as a recruiter, and he was told by multiple other people that he connected with that his skills weren't relatable or weren't transferable to recruiting for a company or an agency and things like that. And I said, I don't necessarily agree with that, but let's take a look at the resume. And sure enough, he had copy and pasted from his performance report. And I could see why someone would say his skills aren't transferable, because you couldn't understand his resume. Unless you're from that background, it is like reading a foreign language. It's like me going to, France and trying to read something in French. I have no idea. I need pictures, right? And it's the same way with the military resume when they're coming out. And so he was kind of really down. I wasn't really sure what he was going to do. So we took some time. Unfortunately, the individual he had talked to kind of left a bad taste in his mouth towards recruiting. But through a lot of conversation, I had to meet a few of my other contacts, and I was in Air Force recruiting myself, so I know that world. And typically when recruiters get out of the military, they become recruiters on the outside. And so I had him talk to a number of individuals. We got him squared away with his resume. We had him interviewing within 2 or 3 weeks of getting that new resume up and running. And today he's a recruiter for a large national bank, and he's loving it. He's been doing it for a year now. And it's, for him, it was just such an upbeat, as soon as we translated that resume, got into a really clean, crisp format, he was getting calls. And so he had a number of offers, and he got to choose which one he wanted to go with, which was a complete 180 from what he had been told just 6-8 weeks earlier. So
so you're not only a translator, but you're also an encourager, that that you can help maybe translate for individuals coming out of the military. Absolutely. You can do this. This is very similar to the type of work you've done in the past.
Absolutely. And I've been in the corporate world. I was in the military for about 12 years, medically retired in 14. And then I went right into the corporate world where I was, thrown into a leadership role and have been there for the last 8 years. And the one thing I love the most about that world is the helping those grow and encourage them, keeping their heads up, things like that. And so career coaching gives me that same opportunity, without all the stress of like trying to lead a bunch of people. But it's all about helping people grow. And it doesn't matter if it's in a leadership capacity at a company or through career coaching. I think that's the best part of the job.
Oh my goodness. Best part of the interview for sure. I'm leaving incredibly motivated and very thankful to you and others that are helping our veterans land amazing positions where they're happy about what they're doing.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. There's not enough resources out there. So if I can just help one more veteran, that's my goal. It's always one more. That's my goal.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. Thank you so much for coming and sharing.
Thank you.